I just knew at the end of the day that my art will always be integral to my life and to being happy and to being okay. My name is Jude Harzer. I was born and raised in New Jersey. I grew up in Trenton and then moved to Monmouth County when I was about 10. I was the third of 6 children to a visually impaired mother. She was legally blind since birth, never drove a car, so it's funny that all of my endeavors are focused on the visual. She was a single parent, so being creative and pursuing the visual arts was not ideal because obviously she was on welfare. We were a family from a very dysfunctional, kind of violent upbringing prior to my parents' divorce, and so you're always trying to seek stability, but I ended up I guess for me art was therapy, so I was more academically inclined, and school for me became my refuge and my kind of my salvation. I was very academic and became a valedictorian in my high school class and went to Carnegie Mellon first and then to Mount Holyoke. Obviously I pursued the visual arts but not in art school, and really did not seriously do anything with art for 20 years. After I graduated, I worked in different disciplines, but I still wasn't confident about the visual arts. So I got married, I followed a traditional path, had children, and then when my children, Christina, who's now 30, and Robert, who's 27, when they were in school, I volunteered at their elementary school, and it was actually a principal at their elementary school who encouraged me to consider teaching, because I was always volunteering and painting for their school, and so I said I would try it for a year. So I started teaching 20 years ago. I've loved it, and my first experience with teaching was kindergarten. So I had 36 classes, close to 1,000 5-year-olds, and I have to say it was those 5-year-olds and my children who inspired me to paint again, because I found that I was encouraging them, but I was awed by their creativity. They had no qualms about just making art, and they weren't judgmental about the outcome, and I was kind of envious because you'd ask them what they wanted to do, and they're like, I'm gonna be an artist, and I thought, I'm at this point in my life and still wasn't confident about it. I was an art educator and I wouldn't own it. I felt like the kids, I was learning with them. I didn't know what it meant to write a lesson plan, so I did alternate route. Even though I had my degree, I didn't have a teaching degree, so I went to school at night. I managed my own 2 children that were in elementary and going into middle school, and I just kind of learned on the job, but a lot of it was intuitive because I love art, I love children, and it was more learning with them. They were very good about just spontaneously working and not critiquing themselves and saying, oh, this is terrible. And the ones that did, I kind of attended more to, because I thought that's how I probably always was as a child. But I realized that they're the ones that inspired me to resume making art. So what I started doing is I thought, I'm going to start painting. And I started painting them. I would see them, and I've always loved children. I love their faces, and I love that solemn expression, and I would listen to their stories as a teacher and read about their stories. I made a concerted effort to pay attention to the children that I thought didn't get attention, and they started becoming like the subjects of my paintings. So then for 8 years I taught the kindergarten, and I loved it. It was a dream job. I learned so much. But the population was diminishing, so they decided to dissolve that school. And because I was tenured, and I had gotten Teacher of the Year, and I wasn't worried about a job, but I thought they would put me in elementary, and they pretty much dispersed us without really consulting us too much. and I was put in high school. And then that was a whole other experience. And I thought, how do I make this interesting? I can't blame like, oh, I'm teaching high school and I'm gonna wait to paint. I thought, how do I make this work for me? So every time there was an opportunity to teach something new, photography, graphic design, which I don't know that I'm qualified, but I would say yes to multiple things because I knew then I'd be learning and I would keep it interesting. And so what happened was I ended up with a graphic design program, which I certainly wasn't adept at using Photoshop or Illustrator or anything. And I thought, if I modify it, I can somehow integrate it into fine art. And I also was asked at Brick Memorial to take over an art club. And the art club was new, there was no direction. It became this unwieldy, unmanageable club. So I thought, you know what, we're gonna do a mural. And I noticed like I was always very in awe of public art because of the scale of it, but the impact that it has. So I thought, if I can get these students, rally them to just do like something on behalf of the school, maybe that will direct them. And so we did a few murals that were dedicated to school spirit. And all of a sudden, not only did it transform the students who didn't think they had any skill, but people were paying attention to them working, and they became like ambassadors for the school. The administration started paying attention because often when you are in public schools, especially, a lot of schools dispense with arts programs immediately when there's any budget cuts, but they think of it again as it's an elective but maybe non-essential to most. And I think what happened is we were transforming the school. So all of a sudden people started paying attention and the administration came and they commended us, but we started getting a stipend for the program. And then my graphic design, what I did was I gave them the ability to transform the hallway that I worked in. I watched students who had limited interest, limited skill, create these amazing murals, and it started transforming our hallway. And again, it brought a lot of like community attention. So I started focusing on that, and we started a mural program. I do feel like there's a place for public art that's collaborative, and I'm more willing to entertain other people's ideas. And I feel like I watched how it's created community in my school with my students, but when I traveled, just watching these street artists and graffiti writers and muralists, and I think it's probably the greatest art movement of our century, and we're witnessing it throughout the world. 21st century is time for creativity, collaboration, and for making our mark. All right, so this painting, it's titled White Rabbit, and it kind of is symbolic of a lot of the work that I addressed that had to do with children as observers. They're kind of the protectors of our legacy. So when I got my graduate degree, I was 50, and so this was from 2013. It was from my thesis show entitled White Rabbit at SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design. There's a belief that if you make a wish on the first of every month and you utter to yourself white rabbit, before you've even said a word or spoken a word to everyone, that you can kind of make your wishes come true. And I think about that a lot because children are always wishing for things, even in the worst of circumstances, and they have a lot of these superstitions that, again, they hold to be true and they inherit from their parents. But also white rabbits, they're shapeshifters, and I think children are like that when they're fearful, or they kind of modify who they are to please adults and people in their lives, but they're also comfort objects. So I always feel like in the worst of situations, you see young children and they'll cling to a stuffed animal, they'll cling to a little token, a blanket, and it's somehow protective for them. So in some ways it is superstitious, but they assign this value to an inanimate object, but it becomes very important because they're trying in some way to protect themselves. So I love the darkness of this. It's a little different than some of my work because usually I have a child who is gazing at the viewer directly, and this one, obviously, the child is a little more in distress and withdrawn. There's something a little more mysterious about it, but this, very, very close to my heart, and it really kind of, represents a lot of the work and the mindset of my work. It has to do with children, comforting yourself, and children who are, usually distressed or been abused, and that seems to be a thread throughout a lot of my work. In the back of my mind, I feel like I've always set up two objectives for myself throughout my life, and it sounds simple and maybe selfish to other people, but at the end of the day, I think, what are the things I don't want to fail at? And the two things are being a good mom, because I don't know that I had that growing up, and trying to be an artist that I think I can become. I'm not there yet, I'm still evolving, but it's every year I think, what have I done? I feel like, it's a race with myself. It's certainly not against the creative world, but it's like, I know I can be better. So, so that's pretty much who I am, I think.